Hello and welcome to my first video of 2019, and as this is the first video of 2019, I want to take the opportunity to wish all my viewers a very happy, healthy, prosperous and successful 2019. With that, as you might be seeing on your screen, today's topic is about Azure File Sync and how can we leverage Azure File Sync to move your data from your on-prem file servers to Azure as a centralized location. We'll get into that. And before I get into the deep dive technical demo of Azure File Sync, let me take an opportunity to introduce myself for those folks who are viewing my video for the first time. My name is Atul Raizada. I am a US-based Microsoft partner. Um, I'm not a Microsoft FTE and nobody pays me for these videos, so everything that I do is just my satisfaction to give back to the community. And you will see a lot of other technical videos on my YouTube if you have not already watched them. I hope you may find them very interesting and helpful, right? Now, with that, let's just move into today's topic, which is Azure File Sync, and let's get into the technical deep dive. And before we actually get there, we need to know what are our business requirements, what business challenge we are trying to resolve through Azure File Sync. And the big question here, that why someone would move their files, on-premises files, to a cloud, right? And that's a legit question in my viewpoint. And in order to understand that, we all working in the industry know that how painful and how difficult our on-prem file servers are. The data center footprint goes up because of the file server never-ending requirement for storage, right? We all know that data is growing, to a ridiculous amount, and it will continuously keep growing. In order to maintain that data availability to your user, the storage requirement is an unending saga to every organization, whether they are small, big, large, whatever the case may be. So a solution that we should be presenting should be able to help you to reduce your on-premises storage footprint and eventually trying to minimize your on-premises data center footprint. Apologies. Now that's one challenge. The second challenge that we all also have experienced is that organizations have deployed multiple file servers, multiple locations, and it is a daunting task to manage them centrally, right? So data is in like 500 server, 200 servers. I have worked with organizations with 2,000 file servers, right, spread across the globe, and it becomes a humongous task to manage those file servers. So imagine about the operations and management, which is the next point that we need to talk about. Not only the centralizing the data is important, but also because of these multiple file servers located in multiple locations, the other challenge that every organization runs by and large is to provide the data with the lowest latency locally to the user, right? So you may have a file server sitting in US, but a user in India needs to access that file. So how do we manage that? And there are solutions already. Some of them are Microsoft solutions like DFS or DFSR that we know. I'm not going to go into DFS today. Or there could be other SAN replication or hardware replication solutions. There are other solutions, expensive solutions that are available in the market. All of them have a very difficult overheads of the management, as well as they're very costly. They're very expensive, right? So if we present you a solution today which can reduce the on-premises storage footprint, which can centralize the data so that you can manage it effectively, which also allows you the high availability and a built-in DR capabilities, then it also allows you to provide the data, which is extremely important, with the data locally to your users. So a user sitting in Germany has the access to the same data in the same way, and the user sitting in Singapore also has the same access, right? And that's extremely powerful in terms of the end user experience, the data availability. And as we are moving forward, this is also helping us minimizing the overheads, the management overheads. And of course, all this would be invalid, or it will go into wastebasket if we cannot make it cost effective. So all these points are our key business requirement that defines this solution. And in my viewpoint, not being a Microsoft FTE, Microsoft has done a really good job in this space. So let's see what the architecture looks like at a very high level. So when we talk about uh, Azure File Sync, we have got, obviously, in my example here, we have got two locations. One is in New York and second is Seattle. We have got file server, we have domain controllers, we have got users sitting here, right? So that's our current environment where file servers are being accessed on the SMB by the users or NFS, right? Now, when we introduce this solution, we introduce Azure File Sync, which is running obviously in Azure. And Azure File Sync is configured with the sync group. And what does the sync group actually means? The sync group is a combination of Azure Storage Account, obviously, because this data has to be stored in Azure, so that's needless to say. And because all these files are going to be stored in Azure Files, not on blobs or not in tables, so we need Azure File Shares there too, right? And that constitute a sync group. Once we have this sync group here, then you can register multiple file servers. So for an example here, the file server here, this guy, and file server here, the other guy. I'm sorry, should go back. Right. So the file server, both the file servers are registered in Azure, and when you register them, you attach them to a sync group. You could have multiple sync groups here, and I will explain you when the planning section goes into that why you should have more than one sync group depending on how much storage you need, right? So there are certain limitations that we need to keep in mind to design the solution appropriately. So in one sync group, we can have multiple file servers, right? And it also provides the data deduplication if you're not doing it already there, right? So that's extremely important. So you don't need to pay for extra storage here. Then also, once this is the servers are registered, the file servers are registered into that sync group, then you configure a cloud endpoint. And it's very straightforward. Cloud endpoint is actually a share or a volume that you could configure. And once you do that, the data starts replicating to Azure, right? And then the interesting part here is, say for an example, your data currently, say for an example, Seattle doesn't exist today, right? And Seattle users are also accessing the data from New York file servers, hypothetically. Now, in order to make it very effective in a multi-site sync scenario, what we can do here is in Seattle, we can have another file server, and we just add them to the sync group here, the same sync group, right? Register them, add into the sync group, create an endpoint, and the data is now syncing here. So what happens here, the point that I mentioned earlier, that you have a centralized data, and now it is replicating to multiple geographical location. And the beauty is that these users are accessing the data locally. So if you are familiar with DFS, it's kind of DFS, and it actually replaces DFS to some extent, though you could use DFS and Azure File Sync parallel, but I would question why would I do that, because now I have a centralized storage and I don't have to worry about versioning and this and that, because this is all coming down from a centralized storage, and that makes this solution extremely powerful, right? So far what we have done is that we have replicated the data to a centralized location, which is Azure File Shares, and then we are able to replicate that data back into multiple locations with a multi-site sync option, right? But we have still not addressed the scenario that we talked about, that how do we minimize the on-prem data center storage footprint, right? That's extremely important. Then it becomes really valuable. And then it also becomes, from the management, backup, restoration perspective, then also becomes extremely powerful. And that is accomplished through cloud tiering, right? And the cloud tiering is configured here, enabled on Azure File Sync. And when you do that, you have got two parameters we'll see in a demo shortly, that you could say, hey, if my file server volume goes down, percentage of volume, free space on volume is less than 60%, you start cloud tiering. And just for clarification, cloud tiering means that the files are moved to Azure and they are replaced by a shortcut on the actual storage. So let's say there was a file, a 2 gig file or 2 MB file. Now when it moves here, you replace it with the shortcut, which would be a few kilobytes, right? And that's how what happens is the footprint is reduced. You can also enable that, okay, which files should stay locally, so that every time you need not to go to Azure to pull that file, you can say, hey, if that file has been accessed for last 2-3 days, then you can keep an offline copy. That means those files would be immediately accessible from the file servers. Rest of the files are tiered to the Azure storage, and if the user wants to open those files, it would pull the data out of Azure storage and present it back to the user transparently. So what we have accomplished here, multiple things in my viewpoint. We have been able to address the first business challenge, which was reducing the cost, reducing the storage footprint, because we are doing the cloud tiering. We have also centralized the data. We have also allowed the local availability of the data, right, in multiple geographical locations in a seamless way and in very effective way, right? So end user experience has gone up. Centralized data is managed now, and the cost also goes down because now storage in Azure is cheap compared to the storage that organizations are paying right now. So basically, it is meeting all the business challenges and requirements that I mentioned in my last slide, right? And that is the power of this solution. I'm not sure why people are not using this solution. I thought that this should be a hot potato and organizations should jump to it because this is so powerful. Basically, if I go back into my archiving experience where we used to do the file server archiving, Symantec, extremely expensive, extremely difficult solution, this is providing you the same thing, right? These shortcuts, you can call them shortcuts or a URL or stub, whatever you want to call them, but the fundamentals are the same. Basically, the actual file is being replaced by a shortcut or a stub or a URL, whatever you want to call it. And that is extremely powerful. And then we have the another beautiful feature that Microsoft has introduced recently. It's in the preview mode that you can also do the backups of your Azure files within the Azure. That's already in the preview mode. You can try it and test it, and I'll show you. And this Azure files storage is GRS, so you're already bringing the high availability into the solution at the Azure level. You already have a high availability built on the on-prem solution. God forbid one of these server dies down. No big deal. You add a new server, register the server, add it to sync group. It would get synced back from the centralized data. And that is the power of Azure File Sync in my viewpoint. And I think more and more organizations, once they understand how it works and what value it brings to organization, I think they would start using it more and more, right? And I'm a little bit surprised that it has not gone the way it should have gone by now, but I'm sure the people who watch this video may be excited to try it and use it in their own environments. With that, let's go to the next slide, which is extremely important, that what are our requirements and what are the limitations, right? So all looks good. Everything that glitters is not the gold here, my friend, right? So what is the requirement for file servers? We have to have the minimum file server version is Windows Server 2012 R2. So if you're working with 2008 R2, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. So minimum is 2012 R2. Obviously, it supports 2016 and 2019 as well. You need to have PowerShell 5.1, which is the case already on 2016 and 2019, so you don't need to do anything extra. On Server 2012 R2, you might have to install it, but again, it's not a big deal, right? We do it all the time. Then you need to install the Azure RM PowerShell. Very simple to do that. And then you need to have connectivity to Azure on HTTPS. You don't need a site-to-site VPN or Azure Express. You may use that, but it's not a requirement. You can just do it as long as your server has internet connectivity to Microsoft Azure, right? So that's how I am doing it. I'm not using a site-to-site VPN, or I'm not using ExpressRoute in my demo. And obviously we need to turn off the Internet Explorer enhanced security. Not a big deal, I guess. This is a very minimalistic requirement. In terms of Azure requirements, we need an Azure storage account and we need the file shares, right? And we need access to the file shares. Now, what are the limitations? This is extremely important when you're planning the solution. So first limitation from Azure File Sync is that it has a 5 terabyte limit. So if you have more data than 5 terabyte, then it's not, there's no need to be panicked, but Microsoft actually is working on raising this limit to 100 terabytes. But until that is done, what you could do is that you could create multiple sync groups and you can configure multiple file shares in the background to overcome this challenge, right? So you have sync group A, sync group B, sync group C, and then sync group A is connected to another file share, and the sync group C is connecting to another file share, and that's how you can overcome this limitation of 5 terabyte if that's the case. We also need to understand the minimum size of a file share, right? So there's no minimum here, of course, and if you go with the premium, then it's 100 gig. Maximum size of a file share in Azure is 5 terabyte, as it is shown. Maximum size of a file in file share is 1 terabyte, or 1 terabyte rather, TIB. There's no limit of maximum number of files in share, and here's your IOPS. And that's pretty much it. With that, let's dive into the demo. So folks, I'm logged on to my Azure portal, and I actually have already configured the file sync or the storage sync services here. So I may not be able to add one more here. I'll be able to show you where and how to do that. And I have also registered one server, and I also have fully configured and replicated it. So I can show you that. And then what we could try to do here in this demo is that try to add one more server from the scratch. So that will explain you the whole process in more details, right? It's not that difficult to do that, but once you see it, you will have more confidence to do it and play around it, and that's the objective, right? So right now, if you see here, the Azure File Sync is my storage sync services here, right? And it's already configured here. We have got a sync group, and in the sync group we have an endpoint. So before I go to the sync group, I will show you the registered servers, and I have this server az_sql which is right now rebooting and doing a Windows update. So as soon as it come back, I'll show you that. And inside this AG_SQL, so you could register multiple file servers here. I have one example here, and we will add one more in this demo. Then we have a sync group, as we discussed earlier in our initial discussion. We have a sync group called as a 101, and inside the sync group I have already configured the server endpoint, and the server endpoint is on this registered server which I showed you earlier, and the registered server here. This is interesting here to see that your tiering policies, right? That's very important, and right now it's enabled. Remember that tiering policy cannot be enabled on a system drive, so this is what you need to keep in mind. And then you can say define the parameters here. So first is that you can say, hey, if my volume size free space, read here, the free space on the volume is goes down then 50% or 20%, then you trigger it. Then that means you start replacing those files in the file server with the shortcuts, right? So right now, just for testing purposes, I did it 100%. Right, so always preserve the specified percentage, the free space on the volume. I'm saying to preserve everything on my drive. That's why I said 100, so that I can see that cloud tiering is working. I just did it about an hour back, so it's still happening, it's still processing that, but I already see the results. Once the server comes back, I'll show you that I have about 1.7 gig of files, and actually on the file share, but the size on the disk is about 40 megs right now, right? So that shows you that how do you remove the data storage footprint requirement, and that's exactly you want to see, and that's what is going to be shown in our demo, right? And then you have interesting option here that only cache files that were accessed and modified within the specified number of days. So this allows you to have a better end user experience, and you can define depending on your requirements. Say, hey, any file that has been opened in last 2 days or 3 days, you keep a local copy, cache copy on the file servers, so that when the user tries to open that file, they don't have to pull the file from Azure. They get it right from the Azure, on-prem file servers. And that makes it, from end user experience, it makes it very efficient and the right way to do it. I strongly recommend to do that. I did it for our testing purposes, 1 days, and we'll see that momentarily once my server finish the Windows updates, right? So with that, I'll get into my lab where my server is still, I think, running the Windows update, and as soon as it finishes, I'll come back and we'll start looking at it, right? So folks, my server is back, and I can show you that I have already installed the Azure File Sync agent. If you see here is the file sync file storage sync agent updater. If you need to update that file sync agent, we don't need to do this at this point of time. And I would like to show you that the impact of the whole solution that we are talking from the beginning. So on this particular server, I have got a C drive and I have a E drive. As I mentioned that you cannot turn the cloud tiering on the system drive. That's why I have added a E drive. And on the E drive, I have a share one, which is the cloud endpoint. And if you look at the property of this, which I told that started happening, it's not a huge thing, but it's just to give you an impression that how do you get the results that you are trying to look into, right? So now you will see there that actual size of the file is 1.7571 gig, and because of the cloud tiering, the disk size is only 48.3 MB. So that proves the first point of the slide, that we can minimize the storage footprint in your data center by leveraging the Azure File Sync services. The beauty here is that the end user sees no difference, right? Because they're still accessing the same file services. You don't need to change your group policies or login script to log on and differently, or tell the user to go differently to access the data. Your ACLs are the same, the permissions are the same. So pretty much you are having the same umbrella in terms of the end user experience, and you are changing the underlying architecture to allow all the features and benefits that we have talked in the beginning, right? And that's the beauty. So for the time being, you will see that all these files are 1.71 gig, and there are a lot of files here, right? There are small files here, about 2,661 files. So obviously that's why you have about 48.3 MB files. So if your file size are bigger, then this footprint will further go down, right? And that's the beauty of the solution. So far we have seen that this is a single site deployment. Now, in order to make you understand it better, we would make sure that we would deploy this agent on the new server, configure it in the same sync group to show you that it can also provide the multi-site sync, where you have a centralized data in Azure file shares, and then you can have multiple access point. I would call them as multiple access point in different locations where users can access their data locally. And that makes this solution pretty intriguing. I already mentioned that 5 terabyte of storage, file share storage with the GRS, with the geographical region storage, would cost you about $460 or 400 something around that, right? So it's cost saving. Your operations and management overheads are gone. And I will also show you that you could do the backups of Azure file shares. This is in the preview mode right now, but as you know that Microsoft would release it shortly. So you have everything that you're looking for, your solution, without going into the complexity of over complex solutions. Like many times I see customer using Panzura, the storage, or other storage, SAN-based replication, storage-based, hardware-based replication, and most of the time we ran into challenges, expensive, very millions of dollars customers spend on just to provide the access to this file data securely, safely, and fast, right, with the lowest latency, which you're getting here without doing anything. This service is free. The only thing that you pay is for the storage, which is dirt cheap compared to the storage that you are paying right now on-prem. So it's a win-win situation, right? Anyhow, I'm gonna go here and show you a couple of other things before I go to the new server and add it as a multi-site location. So those folks who have not done and work on the Azure storage, I just want to show that how simple it is. I have got two storage accounts, and when you configure, you make sure that you create it in the right location, right data center, because if you don't match it, that's not going to show up. So creating a file share is as simple. You have a storage account, or you could create multiple storage account. You go to the files, and right now I have one. I can add one more file share, and let's do it as a demo 102, right? Only thing to remember here, don't waste time, it only would take the lowercase, right? You can set a quota here, and I'm going to set the quota as 10 gig here. And that's all you need to do this share, to create a share. The another important benefit that many of us have been struggling, and that's extremely important, that Microsoft gives you the ability of connecting to these shares directly. Basically, you could map this drive, right? So if I go connect here, I could do that, but there is a huge challenge. You could do it through PowerShell, or you could do the command prompt. You can actually map it as a Z drive on your users or wherever you want to. The challenge is, which is what is diminishing the the utilization of the file shares, is that it needs port 445 to be opened. The port 445, generally the ISPs would block it. And even if you are opening it in your internal network or your organizational network, the problem is if the user goes home and he tries to open the Z drive, it's not going to open because his ISP at his home or a hotel may not provide him, may not open the 445 port. So it's a very inconsistent result from the end user perspective, especially if the user is, work from different locations, right? So that's why it is a very limiting factor in order to map the file shares. One of the workaround that you have now is to use the file sync services, which eliminates this all the problem of the SMB 4445 port, because now the data is being accessed through HTTP or HTTPS, and in that case we don't run into this problem. The files that you like to provide it to your users, like a offline file or a cache file on your file server, is there, and the user accesses directly, so they can do a VPN to their environment, and here you go. So nothing changes. That's the beauty. And in reality, your on-prem file servers becomes a caching server, right? Because you're tiering the data to the cloud. All the files are in cloud. Only the required files are kept on your file server as a cached offline file. So pretty much your file servers are now turned into caching server. That is extremely impressive. I don't know how you agree with me or not, but I feel it very, very, very attractive, right? And eliminate all the possible humbug and headaches around it. I don't have to worry about it. That's the best part of it. Now, let's see if we can do this on a second server, right? So I have a second server ready that I just created as a Windows 2016 file server, right? I have not done any work. It's just joined to the domain. I have got two drives here, right? C and E, and we will go from the very basic. So first thing that I would do is I would disable the advanced IE setting, right? So I can go to the server manager, and the local server, and I need to fix the IE enhanced security configuration, right? So it's refreshing right now. It's on. I don't want it. So the first thing that we need to do here is turn it off. And you might have already done it, so it's no brainer. So we have accomplished the first thing, as I showed you in my slide. The second thing that we need to do is that we need to install the Azure PowerShell RM, right? So I'm going to launch the PowerShell. I think I have copied the command here, and right? It's very simple. Install module. Remember that if you are running on 2012 R2, then you need to upgrade your PowerShell to PowerShell 5.1 before you do that. 2016, 2019 is already running PowerShell 5.1, so you don't have to worry about it. And let's see what it's come back. And I'm gonna say yes here, obviously. And it's gonna take a few minutes to install the Azure PowerShell. I'm gonna pause it, and once it is complete, we'll come back. All right, folks. So the the Azure PowerShell installation is now complete, and now we can go ahead and continue working here. Now, before I do the next step, I just want to make sure that we understand the scenario. So the first server that I showed you, the AZ SQL, let's say that was hypothetically that was sitting in New York. In the second server we are adding in the multi-site sync scenario, imagine that server is sitting in Seattle, right? That's the situation that we are working. The original server in AZ SQL, which was in New York, has already synced the data to Azure File Services or file shares. Now we're going to add this additional server in the sync group and hope that data is now replicated back into this server so that users can start accessing data locally in Seattle, right? That's the scenario we are talking about, and that makes it so very powerful. Now, Microsoft has also given us some interested evaluation tool so that before you deploy the file sync services on your file servers, you can evaluate whether it meets all the prerequisites, and also your data set, all your files that you are trying to replicate, are they good or they have some challenges there. So just for the sake, we're going to try to deploy it here. Okay, so we are going to install that package first. And once that is installed, we'll run the second command. I ran into an error. Let's see if we can make it work. And it says I still want to try that. I'm gonna use this here. See what happens. So that is completed. Let's try to run the second command now. So I think I have installed all the required packages. Now we can try to run our tests here. So I'm running a PowerShell command here that would give us both the system requirement as well as the dataset requirement check, and I'm putting into this folder. Hopefully that should work fine. Huh. As always, not that simple. So folks, I realized that it needs a .NET 4.7.2. Once I installed it, I actually broke down the command into two. I'm going to check the computer prerequisite first, and then I'm going to run the data set requirements first. So I ran that, invoke Azure Storage Sync Compatibility Check, computer name, that's my server name, and it says computer name, OS version check, pass, file system checked, warning, right? So let's see what's going on. So folks, I ran the command to check the files compatibility issue and I did not find it. So I had e:/sav folder where I have 2660 files and number of directories scanned were 418. So we are good to go. I just want to show you that I just copied it just for testing purposes. So if I go here in this drive, I have a sav folder which has got a lot of files here, right? Now what we're going to do here is we're going to create another share, new folder, and I'm going to call it as a share that we are going to use as a cloud endpoint. Share, let's say 2, and I'm going to share it, making sure it's good to go. Sharing, advanced sharing, share this folder, permissions, apply. Okay, I'm not doing too crazy with permissions here, but let's just leave the way it is. So share 2. Alright, now we're gonna try to install the Azure File Sync agent. So I should log on to the portal first. Alright, so I'm logged on to the Azure portal. I'm gonna go to dashboard, and tool file sync, registered servers, and I'm gonna download the file sync agent to install it on this machine. And this is 2016 server, so I think that's the MSI I need. I'm just gonna run it. Should be straightforward. We have done it many times, all of us. Next, accept, next, directory is fine, no proxy setting for me. Alright, all good. Install. Let it get installed. It should take less than a minute. Alright, installation is complete. Now it should give us a chance to register it. Click OK. Sign in. Alright, now we need to pick up our subscriptions. I have 2 of them, and I need to pick up the subscription where this storage services is installed, storage sync services is deployed. Need to pick up the resource group, and I hope to find the sync services, right? Very straightforward. Register it, and it's going to ask again. Alright, so we are good here. So if I go back here on my dashboard here and I go to File Sync and I see registered servers, I see the second server, right? We just added AG file az.local, and now we need to go back into overview where we should see our sync group, and we need to add a cloud point, right? So now add a server endpoint, and the server would be the new server that we have, and specify the path, right? So the path is e colon share 2. That's what I think we created. Now cloud tiering is disabled. We need to enable it, and we need to say 100% here just for the test, and I'm going to say for 1, and that's it. So momentarily, once it's start working and this is showing the newer version is provisioning, and we should see the files being copied. Of course, there should be shortcuts copied there on the new server, and that would conclude it basically. Let's just wait for a few minutes and I'll come back once it is done, and I'll show you that the files are copied over there. So folks, if you look into the file server the one that we just added, everything is shared to the share 2. All the folders are here. It's good to go. And that means that we have accomplished everything that we have spoken from the beginning, right? So first what we did, that we were able to replicate or synchronize the data from our existing file server in New York to the Azure file share through Azure File Sync, right? Created all the server endpoint and the cloud endpoint. So we centralized that. Then we also did the cloud tiering. So that means we were able to create the shortcuts of those files on my file servers, and all the files were now located onto the centralized location in Azure Cloud in Azure File Share. Then we also added a second server, which presumably in Seattle, and configured it in the same sync group so that it could also replicate the data from the centralized file servers. And that is also replicated. So now my users in Seattle can access the data locally on the Seattle servers, while my New York users can access the data locally on their New York user. And that's the beautiful part of it. Cost, we already talked about. Operation overhead, pretty much gone, right? One last thing that we need to look into, that in the preview mode, probably two of them, that you could do the backups now here, right? So if I go back to my dashboard and I go to my site recovery services, which is the vault that I created, and here is the backup option, right? And I have you can configure the backup virtual machine, or you could also configure the backup of Azure File Share in the preview mode, right? So you don't even have to provide a third-party backup one here, and you can go here, configure the backups, and then you will figure it out once it finds it. So my storage account is this guy, okay, and that's my file share, right? And that's it, and I just say okay, and my backup is done, and I can configure my backup policy, how often I want to do, blah 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 blah. But my point here is that all our business requirements in terms of minimizing the footprint into the storage footprint in your data center, we accomplished that. In terms of centralized data storage, we accomplished that. In terms of allowing access to the users to to their closest location, we accomplished that because we added the second server in New York, oh sorry, in Seattle. They were able to see that. In order to do the backups, we were able to do that. Our storage here for the file server is already redundant, so that has a high availability from the GRS perspective. We accomplished that. Cost, we brought it down significantly. Eventually, the solution is good to go. And that's all I have to present it for today. I hope you like it, and I'm hoping to make another video pretty shortly, maybe tomorrow or in this week, around Azure storage security. Right? Stay tuned,
and that's coming, and that's gonna be another interesting video for you guys. I hope you like it. If you like it, please subscribe it. Remember that my only motivation to do this is from your feedback, from your likes, dislikes, comments, and when you subscribe to my channel, right? I don't get paid by Microsoft, I don't get paid by anybody. So to keep me doing this work, I need encouragement from your side. It could be a negative feedback, I don't mind it, because that's how I improve myself. But as long as you provide your valuable comments, like, dislike, subscribe to my channel, that's very helpful. That will keep me motivated to keep coming with new interesting videos. Thank you again all for watching. I appreciate your time. Hope this was a good utilization of your time. Thank you. Bye bye.